Thank you so much for tuning in. Um, really grateful for this specific experience since we are in Berlin. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do not forget to do so, as we would like to develop this podcast, make it enjoyable every week. This beautiful endeavor that we have started upon. Today's guest, none other than Jeff Kwasi Klein. Thank you so much for your willingness to do this.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah,
Really looking
yeah,
forward to our conversation.
yeah. Me too. Me too. Um, it's a podcast on education, which focuses, let's say, slightly on secondary school education.
Mhm.
And obviously, it's not really rigid in that sense. So there's no need to just um, just, let's say, captivate ourselves within that realm. We'll have the opportunity as well to elaborate on your development, on all the beautiful things that you are doing and embarking upon right now, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to just share some wishes along the way. So that's just basically the setup. Would you mind taking a trip down memory lane?
Of course, let's go.
If I were to ask you to reflect on that period of your life, let's say secondary school,
Mhm.
how would you do that?
So, if I were to look back, I see myself in Cologne, which is in West Germany. Grew up there, um, and actually, so in Germany we have like first school is like the elementary school. It goes from in the West. It goes from let's say age 6 to age 10, first to fourth class, and then after that there is kind of a splitting, and we have three different levels. Then after that, and this is Hauptschule, Realschule, Gymnasium, right?
Mm, mm,
And this is actually still a remnant from Nazi times because the Nazis and also subsequent governments, they wanted to make sure that people kind of learn and are going on track of the class, if you will, that they were supposed to be.
mm,
So this is a very early divider. I mean, think about it, you're 10 and then you kind of get your track laid out for you. Of course, there's the possibility of upgrading and downgrading, so to say. But this is already a big marker in your life. And for me, going from elementary school to gymnasium was definitely with some hurdles involved. And these are hurdles that are, or experiences that many people make, many Black people, many people of color make in
mm,
Germany, despite them being proficient in the language, which I was, despite having the qualification through the grades, I still got a recommendation to go to the second level, the Realschule, even though I had the qualification to go to gymnasium. And this is also, this whole system is placing a lot of power on teachers, right?
mm,
On elementary teachers. But it is also a system, you know, you need to have the recommendation, but it's not an end all be all. But most of the time people go with the recommendation, especially when it's coming from an authority figure like a teacher who has been with your kid for 4 years. Maybe also, you know, if you're a migrant, you don't know the system too well, and you just go with that recommendation. But then there are also others who fight for their kids to actually go to the highest level or go to the level that they're qualified for. And luckily, my mother was one of those people fighting for me to go to gymnasium.
mm,
And I think without her fight and insistence, yeah, I would have gone a different track. I would have gone the middle way, the Realschule way. But I actually ended up then in gymnasium. And I think the idea here is that, or the bias that is there is that, well, this child is coming from a migrant family. The parents might not be as proficient in German. That's why he's not going to have the support system. So let's give him a track that he can handle or that child can handle more easily. But if anything, that is an indictment on the support systems that are in place. Because if you have kids that are qualified to go there, if you have kids that are bright and want to learn or want to, in my case, it was also staying with my friends because all my friends were going to gymnasium
yeah.
and I didn't want to go to a different place. So it's a mixture of all of these things. But at the end of the day, I feel like there's too much unchecked power on these teachers to just make that recommendation with all of that bias baked into that. And this has adverse effects, of course. And since this is an experience that so many make, it's a structural issue.
Yeah. And you also pointed out the unchecked power, right? Because obviously there's a system in place that at the end of elementary school sets you out on your specific journey,
Yeah.
but the criteria, um, even though that you would qualify, you mentioned that there is a bias in a sense, right? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
there's an automatic bias because I don't think that there's a rigorous process through which that decision is being made. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any power placed on the teacher. Of course, the teacher has a good idea of the proficiency, the level that a kid has,
Hmm.
but then that teacher just goes from their gut feeling to a certain degree, of course, also observation and so forth. But there's not a rigorous system for that in place to my knowledge. That certainly wasn't back then when I was still in elementary school. So yeah, that is already kind of a bug in the system.
Hmm.
And given that obviously people can be biased, they bring in their preconceived notions of certain groups, certain people, and so forth. Yeah, this then, like I said, will produce just hardship and just a harder path than it has to really.
Yeah, you talked about your mother
Mhm.
being like the, let's say, one, let's say, an ultimate source of support in a sense, especially regarding your personal development and the possibility of still being able to go to gymnasium, as you said. Um, how did she play a role in this?
Well, I mean, for her, really, it was she just wanted to make sure that I get the best education and that actually her, if you will, her gamble to come to Germany. She came to Germany in the mid '80s with my father,
Mm,
but her gamble does pay off. Basically, she made all those sacrifices and made her way to Germany, a society, especially back in the '80s, that was not open for people who were looking differently, especially Black people. For her, really coming from Ghana in the mid '80s, it was like going to a whole completely different new universe, really. Um, but she made that gamble. She made that step and that sacrifice so that her children might have a better shot at making it in life and building prosperity and so forth.
yeah,
So her influence was huge in that she put us on track to do that and made sure that we can have that opportunity to go there. Um, but in terms of actually helping me with homework and all of these things, um, she couldn't do that. And this is also why then in that case, I'm saying that there needs to be support. And there is support. There are different ways of supporting. Of course, there's like after school teaching. I went to a hort. So that is like a after school institution. It's almost like a kindergarten, but then you
yeah,
go to school first and then you come back, you do your homework, you get support also from educators there. And then you can play with your friends and do different activities. That was actually the support system, enough of a support system for me
yeah,
to then be able to, get my grades and get my schoolwork done.
yeah,
But of course, it was also a lot of self initiative, and that initiative wasn't always there with me either. Think through my like teenage years, basketball was the focus for me. I was basketball kind of freak. Like it was the only thing that I was really focused on.
yeah,
And but then there's another let's say demarcation, another split after 10th grade, because then you can do abitur
hmm,
or you don't do abitur. So if you qualify for abitur, you can then get the qualification so that you can then pursue higher education. With me, I almost failed the class because of French and math, and I had to then go to summer school. And actually going to summer school and going through everything I did, like I had like an exam to save me in math. I chose math, But going through summer school and going through all of the stuff that we went through before actually helped me to understand it. And then I realized it's actually not that complicated. It's just that you have to listen, and then you can actually do it. But I think that, and this comes to show that this decision being made after age 10 class, the fourth grade,
Mm.
that's a very early stage to make such a decision. And some children are just not even late bloomers, I would say, but some children just, I don't know, maybe need different conditions. Maybe they need to mature a little bit, and then they can make that path. And then it's possible to move up in that rank, but it's hard to move up in that rank. And for me, it was important to have this summer school, because then all of a sudden, math being my worst subject then became my best subject, to the point where I even helped my fellow pupils with their learning, and they at the end had a better grade than me. I had a good grade, but they had a better grade than me, and I was kind of proud of that because I taught them. So
Yeah.
that was a cool experience for me, and it was an experience of understanding that, yeah, education is actually accessible, depending on whether it's being made accessible or it's not being made accessible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, what a beautiful turn of events, in a sense, right? And I really love the fact that that you described your mother's role real prominently, and especially, she made the move to Germany in a, let's say, a period of time which was also, of historic significance as well. I mean, I think there was still the division
Yeah,
between East and West Germany, and you having to navigate your way through, and having summer school as, sort of like a gateway to more opportunities, in a sense. How did your development, let's say, how did it continue?
hmm
Let's say, regarding more, the latter years of,
yeah.
secondary school education.
So in the Abitur
Mhm.
phase, I think I was very eager to just learn. That summer school experience really inspired me. And I started to get better grades, and for the first time started to consider to study, because before that, that wasn't even like something that I thought about.
No.
Not that I like, it's not that I thought about it and I was like, ah, it's not for me. I didn't even think that it would be something for me. And this is also another thing, of course, is what belief do you instill in children and in pupils? Do you instill the belief, and that belief is instilled by teachers, by parents, by society in general? Do you instill that belief that, well, you can actually have that upwards mobility? You can actually go and pursue education, and this will actually be good for you? Or do you have that belief being brought to you that this is not for you? This is for maybe those white kids in their houses, in their houses, not in like people who grew up in flats like me. But it always kind of seemed far away,
Mm.
and then all of a sudden, it started to be something that's possible. So yeah, so I did the Abitur. Uh, I was like everybody else, a little bit disoriented on where I want to go, but I knew that in order for me to study well, I need to do something that interests me. I can't do something just learning a profession just to have a good job, just to make money. But I needed to do something that's interesting to me and that has some value for me. And thankfully, after Abitur, I was able to stay some time in Ghana, that's where my family's coming from.
Yeah, yeah, wow.
I was able to, for the first time, not only be in Ghana, like in from one family compound to the next, and being kind of protected, but actually, roaming free and really seeing the country and really learning, what Ghanaian life, culture, people, what they really are about. And that, and then coming back to Germany, I could then see the stark differences within those societies. And also, of course, the question arose for me, that poverty that many Ghanaians are living under. Is this something that is it their fault, or are there conditions that actually make that? So this then started my interest in understanding basically the world order, and understanding politics, and understanding how poverty is actually being produced and reproduced and reproduced. Started understanding more and more that the West is not this noble force for good, as is being taught to you through history lessons. For example, we talked a lot about, of course, the Nazi regime in those dark ages.
Mm.
But then the story afterwards was kind of a story of triumph, a story of overcoming these barbaric sentiments, and then charting our way through to liberalism and to democracy and so forth. And some of that is true, but then of course, like uh, Shimamanda says, you cannot just look at one story. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, and I'm paraphrasing badly, but you know what I mean. Like, you have to look at the full picture, and there's danger in a single story. And through my interest in understanding how the world works, I then understood, oh, there's much more to that story. And yeah, I would later on understand, yeah, there's a Western Empire actually, and it's a continuation that we're seeing for 500 years of exploitation, of taking advantage of, um, you know, supporting corrupt elites, of all of these measures in order to get cheap resources, get cheap labor, or even enslave people, and doing this through violence, genocide, and so forth. And this is also part of the story, but it has been left out
Mm.
because the Western understanding of development is really a story of, you know, ingenuity, just like European ingenuity. And because of all of these great thinkers and explorers and so forth, this is why they build up this whole thing. But they build up this whole empire, and this is why they're dominating the world. But this really is a neat story, but it is far from the whole story and far from the truth in many ways.
Mm. What an enriching experience that you described, right? To go to Ghana and to to be amongst people from all walks of life, in a
Mm.
sense, right? And to elaborate on these kinds of subjects and to see that there's more to the truth.
Yeah.
And the things that you are describing, I mean, we are still witnessing them today, right? I mean, the 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 lack and the, let's say, the inequality that we are still facing within Western societies, but also what the West in let's say in comparison to other parts of the world, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of um, let's say indescribable things that
Yeah.
we are still witnessing today. Um, you told me that that your understanding broadened, right?
Mhm.
And that sense of, let's say, the inequality that you were seeing within Western society, and from where I am looking at, right, I see that it had to be an extremely enriching experience to go back to Ghana, in a
Yeah.
sense, right? How did it play a role after that?
Well, I mean, it played the role that I discovered my love for traveling.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough and privileged enough and worked towards being able to see many different places
Mm.
and yeah, really traveled the world at a young age. Before I started studying university, I started in Berlin at the Freie Universität, the Free University of Berlin. Um, but before I went there, and we can talk a little bit about my uni experience, of course, as
Yeah, of
well.
course, of course.
But before I went there, I had the privilege of traveling, and uh, you know, everybody was in a rush to study, and I didn't really understand why. We've just been for 13 years in these institutions, and now we could finally kind of be free. So my whole idea was, okay, let me be free. Let me be free and see the world as much as I can. Moved to Berlin and yeah, then decided to stay here. But even in my time in Berlin, and of course also through my studies, I was traveling a lot. And it's of course it's a different thing to talk about issues versus seeing, the practical implications of the theories that you talk about and the kind of political analysis that you learn about, but to see the practical implications of that and to see the impact that certain policies have on people, on families, on prosperity, on their ability to envision a better life for them, with everything around people living in poverty telling them that, well, no, this life is not for you. You can aspire these things, but it is not for you necessarily. I think that was an important experience for me. Yeah, and just to see the beauty of diversity in the world and beauty of cultures, different ways of thinking, and so forth, and how this is an enriching experience for everyone. And my thinking then was, wow, like school didn't at all prepare me for this, and school didn't even touch upon this, and not even a little bit. I felt so. For me, the period between Abitur and my university was a period of education as well. It was
Yeah.
a period of self education, a period of education through seeing things with your own eyes, talking to people, and experiencing it that way.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. And the Western story gets glorified, right?
I
In a
mean,
sense. Yeah,
go on.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. What a beautiful what a beautiful journey, and what an enriching experience as well,
Mm.
to be able to look at the world from so many different perspectives, to have the Ghanaian instilled in that as well. How did you continue upon your journey after, let's say, university and things like that?
After university,
Yeah, yeah,
so we have to talk a little bit about university
yeah. Of
because
course, of
that
course, of
that
course. Yeah,
informed
yeah,
my path.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I wanted to study political science after some, try and error kind of.
Mm,
First enrolled in the university in Heidelberg, and for a course that was called political economy. I thought it was like like politics and economy, but it was just economy.
yeah.
So that wasn't really for me. And I wanted to be in Berlin because Berlin is, of course, attractive, especially for a young man. Um, wanting to see the world, wanting to live in a vibrant city, wanting to be influenced also by different scenes, different cultures, and so forth. So that was the place for me. And I wanted to stay. So I wanted to make sure that I can study here. And I had, again, the privilege to be then accepted to the Otto Suhr Institute.
Mhm.
And the Otto Suhr Institute was very interesting to me because that was one of the epicenters of the '68 movement. So in Germany, one of the big post-war movements, like kind of the cultural, where the cultural zeitgeist completely
Mm,
shifted,
mm,
was the '68 period. And all of these, young adults and teenagers back then at the time who were kind of asking their parents, how could something like the NS time, the Nazi regime, and all of this, how could that happen? What was your complicity in this? And how come that my teacher is a Nazi, my former Nazi, or still a Nazi but in hiding? My the police officer is the, I don't know, mayor is, and so forth. So there were all these people who played a part in the Nazi regime and was still around, and then there was the period of just, opposing that and trying to see if there's different ways to live. And that was also a period of decolonial time. Through my self study, I was able to see the revolutionary time back then and see how, how systems that I also thought this is kind of almost like a written in stone natural law, the way that things are. But then I started to understand, okay, there's actually movement in this, and there can be movement to, better places. And Otto Institute was one of those places where this was happening, or where this was like conceived and developed. So I wanted to be there. I wanted to study there, and I studied political science there. And maybe at the beginning, I was more interested in development policy,
mm.
because I was thinking, okay, how can I then be of service for Ghana? How can I help develop Africa? But pretty early on, I started to understand that development policy is just another tool. It's just another, it can be used, of course, for good. I'm also not criticizing humanitarian aid and humanitarian work. I think that's important when there's like a natural catastrophe or a war happening and so forth. That's very commendable, that work. But for me, the development policy work that was being done by these big institutions like GIZ, or all these American US AID, and all of these big players, the World Bank. Um, I saw more and more examples of how these big institutions were actually wreaking havoc to a certain degree in the countries that they were in. How they were sometimes directly funding the budget of a government, of a corrupt government, of a dictatorship, and so forth, and stabilizing that corrupt and illegitimate government, um, while taking away the people's opportunity and the people's power to challenge the government, because people were in poverty and had to think about, how can I get food on my plate, instead of how can I change the political reality that we're in. But that's just one of the ways that development policies can contribute to impoverishment. Another is structural adjustment programs, for example, by the World Bank, which was a big thing in the 80s, especially. Ghana was one of those countries. Ghana, back then, mid 80s, when my mom was still there, was a military dictatorship. We had a kind of, I mean, it's controversial, but a benevolent dictator, if you will, someone who came in with the military, toppled corrupt regimes, and then twice gave up power to the democratically elected regimes. I would say that this was the groundwork laid so that Ghana could become a stable democracy, which it is. There have been many changes of government, but no conflict, no bloodshed around that. But back in the 80s, since Ghana was leaning socialist, of course, it drew the ire of the West and drew the ire of Americans, so to say. So the economic situation of countries that were not part of the West was getting worse, was worsening and worsening. So at some point, then J.J. Rawlings, who was the dictator back then,
Mm.
decided, okay, I need to take on loans from the World Bank. But this came with the structural adjustment programs. And these structural adjustment programs then said, okay, we can give you that loan. You will be in debt, but you also need to restructure your economy to fit into the Reagan, Thatcher, neoliberal world order. So really what this did is to change the economy so that it is first and foremost an export economy of raw materials. So in Ghana was cacao, it was coffee, and other raw materials. And that then led to a situation where Ghana was exporting much more than it was producing domestically, and this then led to food insecurity. So even though Ghana was, normally speaking, and from all of these economic numbers, for a long time Ghana seemed to be like this poster child of how development can go. But, and we're seeing this right now, the years of growth, of accelerated growth, are over. People are struggling. There's a huge division, huge disparities between the elites, the ones that have, the ones that don't have, between regular people, regular workers, and people, also black people, black Westerners coming to Ghana and living there. There's so much class division. And these structural adjustment programs played a huge part in that. Not sure why I was on this tangent, but this is,
No,
I understand
no,
now, because I was thinking
of course.
about how, yeah, these are just a couple examples of how
Yeah,
I
yeah.
then understood that this is not the path for me, and I saw that, okay, if I want to be of service and support, let me focus on maybe also the local, like where I am. So I was starting to focus more and more on Black people in Germany,
Domestically, here, yeah,
domestically in Europe, and so forth.
yeah.
Of course, always with a connection to Africa. I mean, it doesn't, for me, it doesn't go any other way,
No,
but still with that focus here. And then I started to see, wow, okay, even though I grew up in Cologne, which is a fairly liberal city, which is a city where, people have that mentality of, we are not the racists here, we are the world open people. But then I started again to see cracks in that narrative as well. And started to see that, well, just like in any other place in Germany, there's structural racism in Cologne also, and there is structural discrimination in housing and in education and in labor, in the labor market, and so forth. And this again has adverse effects for Black and brown people in Germany. Um, and there are not only structural inequities, but there are also institutionalized inequities, because the institutions of a country always reflect kind of the power dynamics and the hierarchies of a society. And unfortunately, institutions are often used to cement those inequities and to kind of reproduce them over and over again. And once I started to understand this, I knew, okay, this is a field for me to first to study, but also to work in. And after university, after some time, doing freelancing work here and there, I then started working more and more in Black community spaces in Germany and Europe, and
Yeah.
more and more throughout the world. Then,
Yeah. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel. You have no idea what one simple click will do for the future of this endeavor. So many interesting things that you're touching upon, right? Because, I mean, you were talking about the adjustments in, let's say, the Ghanaian system
Mhm.
and what it implied, the shift to an, let's say, an export-oriented economy, and what it does to a people, and how it increases their dependence on, let's say, quote unquote, the bigger Western world order, in a sense, right? And also the way the systems function here domestically, or maybe even in a broader sense, regarding the whole continent and, let's say, the European Union as a whole, perhaps, because the system should be exactly the force, as you mentioned, to cement all of the forms of inequity within a society among its people. But I believe that you made a very specific reference to this, maybe indirectly a little bit, but it actually didn't, right? Or
It didn't work.
it didn't cement those inequities, and it didn't.
The system in itself,
Yeah,
I mean, the
yeah,
system is definitely trying.
yeah,
It's trying to cement these inequities, but then there are, of course, also other forces at play. The demographic shift, for
mm,
example, is real. There are more and more the percentage of people with migrant backgrounds as they're being discussed here
yeah,
and being defined as people in the first and second generation of migration. That percentage grows. And it's going to grow no matter what. This is the development that is happening. And this is, of course, to a certain degree, a pressure against the status quo, because for Germany to be able to still be one of the top economies in the world, obviously they cannot dismiss the labor that is being offered by migrant people with migrant backgrounds. Not only the labor in, like, let's say, minute fields, but also labor coming out of higher education. And then another force that was at play here was, people like myself, people with migrant background, wanting to take on positions, wanting to go into institutions and work there, and also bringing in their own perspective from their own communities into those institutions and see how they might be able to change the institutions, change some outcomes, empower their own people, empower themselves, strive for prosperity and wealth and so forth, so forth. So that's another pressure that is kind of, yeah, making it harder for the system to keep the status quo. But then what we always see when there's a push towards, let's say, left politics and more equality, there is a backlash that might be even stronger, because the system, of course, then starts to understand people within the system, especially people who have privilege within the system, and power within the system, of course, then want to protect their power. So the pendulum then swings back to the right. I think we're witnessing this right
witnessing
now.
this right now. Yeah, yeah,
This, in a lot of ways, desperate attempt not only to maintain the status quo, but to go back even further, to dream of a, I don't know, promised land back then, make America great again, when we were still, this nation that did this and this and that. And this is a thing that we don't always see in the US. We see that with, many right wing movements, this yearning for when things were better, when things were clearer, so to say, when there was a clearer hierarchy, when it was clear that, okay, as a white person in a white society, I have certain privileges, certain ways that others don't, and I deserve them based on my, being part of the right team, so to say. This whole thing of the in group, the out group, othering, and so forth. So these certainties are crumbling, and people are trying to go back to imaginary places where they felt these certainties were still in place. But of course, even going back to I don't know, the 70s, or Donald Trump is more looking to go back to the like end of the 19th century. These were good times for some people, but disparities were huge back then.
Oh yeah.
Poverty was rampant back then, and there was very little way of for let's say working class to express themselves other than strikes and all of these big things. Now we have much more ways to express dissent and to offer solutions, offer alternatives, and that of course is another pressure. Just there's less of a bottleneck on ideas. There's less of a monopoly of you know facts, if you will, or what is deemed to be factual. And there's more of a democratization of information, which is another pressure on systems that thrive um, on dominating and controlling narratives and so forth.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is changing.
Yeah. What strikes me always, especially when we are touching upon these kinds of topics, is that as a human species, we've came an extremely long way. I'm not saying that things are ideal the way they are right now. Obviously, there are so many things that we still have a lot of work to do on, but um, just the romanticizing things that belong to a past, first and foremost, but also a time in which human life wasn't as it is right now, wasn't as quote unquote good as it is right now. And I'm not saying that we live in a ideal world right now. I mean, uh, given all uh, the the genocides that are taking place and all of the horrors that we are witnessing, on our screens. In a sense, I mean, I'm not denying that in any kind of way, but especially here right now in the West, sometimes I don't understand what's the, let's say, what the real issue is, in a
Mm.
sense, right? I mean, we are living so much better lives right now here, but it's just that it seems, and if you look at let's say governments and all of the right wing movements, and I really, um, was really striking to me is that the whole right wing thing that you see right now, especially
Mm.
in the Netherlands as well now. It's like of yearning of, let's say, older times,
Yeah.
but those times weren't better.
No. And it's just another narration, another um, picture that is being painted,
Yeah,
which is used to divide people. It is used, and this has always been the case. The Romans spoke about this already:
yeah,
divide and rule,
yeah.
divide and conquer. We've seen this also throughout the entire history of the Western Empire, that this was a way to infiltrate and control societies that were to be colonized and were to be exploited, is to find groups that have animosities, maybe, or that have a history, or maybe even to create this animosity and just say, okay, you are this particular race, you are this particular. Like it happened in Rwanda, for example,
Mm,
where they were just coming in. There was an order already there between Tutsi and Hutu.
yeah.
And then, Europeans were coming in and saying, okay, you are closer to whiteness because you are taller, whatever, like some pseudo biological BS. That's why you are the ruling class, and the others are the serving class. And this, of course, then stokes and bring more and more animosity, more and more conflict, and so forth. But it is much easier to rule a nation that was already existent and have had institutions and so forth, kingdoms and states in Africa. It's much easier to rule them if they are in constant, conflict with one another. European settlers, what they not only settlers but European merchants, what they did was also providing weapons and escalating these conflicts, but actually playing both sides. And this is something that we've also seen. It's the story of capitalism. It's the story of the finance system and war profiteering. it's the story of betting on both sides and just selling weapons to both sides and making a ton of money of that. And I mean, we have the military industrial complex as a consequence of that now. But yeah, it's always been the case, and you see that in small, so to say, so in like locally in countries where there is division being sown between, for example, white working class people and migrant
Mm.
working class, whereas the interest between migrant working class and white working class are very similar. There's a lot of overlap in terms of the interests. Everybody wants to be able to, you know, provide for their families, provide for their own lives, have prospects of growing your own life, growing your wealth, and so forth. Being able to have stable income and all of these things, healthcare, education, all of this. Everybody kind of has the same wants and needs,
Yeah.
but then what elites do is then stoking these division along racial lines or along gender lines or whatever kind of the modus operandi is, just to make sure that all of these people who are actually much more than the elites and who have more power if they only would realize it, never actually realize that. They never actually come together, band together, and direct their anger and their demands towards the ones that are actually responsible for the structures and system situations that we're actually living in.
Yeah. Yeah. What you're basically saying too is like, we need to, as a whole, as a society, keep our eyes wide open and not, fall prey to these types of dynamics, right?
Right.
Not bend to um, these ways of dividing us as a society and creating this sort of like they are the notion that some group or groups could or should be the enemy
Right.
with regards to, let's say, racial supremacy in a
Right.
sense.
And the
Yeah.
great thing is, um, when it comes to ideas, when it comes to theoretical backdrop of this, there
Yeah.
are amazing theories, obviously, that are talking about this and that are educating people about, looking behind the curtain, looking behind the narration of empire. So for me, of course, one of the important thing during that time of orientation was reading about those revolutionaries, Patrice Lumumba, like Martin Luther King, like Malcolm X, so many of those who were seeing through the not only the cracks but seeing behind the curtain of what seemed to be reality, of what seemed to be the status quo, and understanding that there is actually a lot of work in place in order to keep that system, and that system and racism and so forth, it has a function, that it is not just a default of the individual. It's not just that something is wrong with you if you have racist ideas and it's just some individual thing that you have to overcome individually, but there's also that there's a function to have racism and other dimensions and forms of inequity, to have them in place so that you can order who has access to what resources, who has access to which societal goods, again, like education, housing, and so forth. So it really has a function. And if you look at this through this lens, and if you look at the world history also through the lens of what's the purpose of this system to exist, who benefits from it, then you start to understand, oh yeah, this is just a war of interest, so to say, and people on top who have who have means, also the means of production. For me, Marxist theory was also eye-opening in understanding how capitalism works and how capitalism fails. Also, it's people that it's supposed to serve, but having all of these critical theories, which were not taught in school, but which were either self-taught, or, and I was lucky to go to a rather leftist, um, what was it, rather leftist faculty.
Mm.
Um, I was exposed to these ways of thinking, and this, of course, then broadened my horizon, but also sharpened my critical lens on anything really. And this is something that is missing, oddly missing. The kind of learning to think critically is not, it doesn't have a function of maintaining the status quo. Therefore, it is not being taught in school necessarily. But if you're lucky, you are being taught how to think critically in university. But this is, of course, also shifting because university, like university education, I think back then, and now I'm starting to romanticize like the past times, kind of. But my maybe romantic idea of higher education was to develop oneself and develop the mind and develop your own thinking instead of just learning something by heart in order for you to be able to have the qualification so that you can have a job. And luckily, some of the professors at the Otto Suhr Institute
Mm.
were kind of old school in that sense. And even though there were restrictions, because this whole bachelor master thing had just been introduced a
Yeah.
couple of years prior to when I started university, they still wanted to make sure that we have space to just explore knowledge and to explore theories and to really critically look at everything that is being presented to us, not just looking uh, critically at, let's say, neoliberalism, but not looking critically at Marxism, but actually being having the tools to look at everything critically and to assess for yourself whether or not this is a theory that can go behind or not.
Yeah.
And that was super important. I think that this is very much missing in education.
Yeah, it's an approach that everybody could benefit from, right? And
That's the problem also.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's also a problem for especially for uh, for those in power, in the
Exactly.
sense, right? But that critical thinking, I mean, especially education. I mean, it just shows you the way it functions. It shows you how us as a society or the society as a whole functions, right? In a sense,
Yeah.
if I were to ask you, and you've touched upon these things prior in this conversation, but if I would just to bring this forward, if I were to ask you, what drives you right now? How would you put that into words?
So I have to go back a little bit. So when I
Yes.
after university, like I said, after some orientation, I started working in Black community spaces, so to say.
Exactly. Yeah, you mentioned
I
that.
started working at the European Network for People of African Descent, which is an umbrella organization of Black grassroots self organizations throughout Europe. Then later on, I would work in at Each One Teach One, which is a Black empowerment organization based in Berlin.
Mm,
We're doing a lot of educational work, a lot of advocacy for people of African descent and other services. So anti-discrimination counseling, for example, that was one project that I led for some time, and then later on, like community fund that was given grants to political educators, Black political educators, and people doing empowerment work. Um, so this was so important for me and so formative for me as well to be able to do this work, to live off this work as well. It was also, again, very privileged because so many people who are doing this work have to do this work without being paid or being in very precarious situations. Um, After that, after working there for almost 5 years, I then moved to philanthropy, to the Multitudes Foundation, which again I was lucky to help build, and help lead for some time. Um, and this really gave me a good view on how philanthropy works. So I first had the view on civil society. Now I had the view on philanthropy. I also was part of the Green Party here in Berlin. Um, Ups and downs, I would say, but a good understanding also of how party systems work and how politics really work, Um, and this also allowed me, again, to look behind the curtain, use all that critical thinking that I've had to see uh, dysfunctionalities, to see um, reoccurring struggle that people in these fields and in these sectors are experiencing, and that is holding them back from actually being able to do the work. and to be more effective and to use, all the potential that civil society, that philanthropy, that politics could have to change lives and to change societies. And those kind of reoccurring hurdles, I understood these are structural issues. Um, After I then left the foundation, to me, it was clear that I need to use my view, my specific view on these different sectors. And I can try to use this for good so that these people who, most of the people, working in these sectors are not interested in just making the most money, but they want to have impact, they want to contribute. They come into organizations that are very precarious, they come into a structure that is, making it hard for them. Then they also in those organizations, because things are so precarious, because it's maybe not as always as professional when we talk about civil society. Then they burn out from the overload of work, from also, and that's another area. So if we talk about civil society and we talk about community, there's obviously a big lap between that, but there's
Yeah.
also some things that are outside. And community, I think, can be so empowering, but it can also be so stressful to a certain degree and power draining because it's so close to home. It's not just your colleagues, but it's your colleague and your brother or your colleague and your sister. It's not just issues that are interesting to you, but it is issues that you're living through. It's issues that your family is living through. So it's much closer to home. Excuse me.
It's okay.
Um, Much closer to home, which makes it, just so much more, or the potential for burnout is just so much higher. And I saw, like I said, these dysfunctions to a certain degree, and I thought, okay, so what can we contribute to change this? And what was inspiring to me is that there is more and more of an understanding that we actually need deep transformation of these systems that had been in place for so long, white supremacy, for example, but also just the representative liberal democracy model that has been in place for so long was coming to an end to a certain degree. We see that in the US very clearly now that the right wing, are fighting for a new system. They're fighting for new realities. They have an idea of kind of what the future should entail. Um, and this idea was very attractive to many people because also it fed on the lowest basic instinct, so to say. They are taken from us, so we have to regain our power. We have to, take our country back, and all of these things, playing into this whole divide and rule card. But these systems that we've had are coming to an end, and now the question is, what is coming after? And what we're seeing on the left, or what we're seeing kind of on the liberal side, is this idea of maintaining the system. Of we have to save our democracy. We have to, basically maintain the status quo. But this is not attractive to people because people want change. People have been yearning for change, but it's not given to them. So that's why they're now going to Trump and other false prophets who are promising them change. I think what was then, like I said, inspiring for me is that there is a growing sentiment that there needs to be something offered to people that is a different vision of what life as society could be, that is not exclusionary like in the right, but that can actually be inclusive and that can actually make it so that we all make it, and not just some of us make it. But what I was seeing in this, system change, the growing system change, political innovation field, is that most of the remedies for the situation, or worsening situation,
Hmm.
were derived and generated from Eurocentric s- thoughts or schools of thought. And again, at the exclusion of other ways of thinking, of other lived experiences, of, let's say, more diverse and more, um, yeah, just other knowledge systems, at the exclusion of those. And to me, that felt like we are reproducing the same mechanism that has gotten us to this place, even though we're trying to transform the system. So that then to me was kind of an invitation to say, oh, let me try to bring this in. Let me try to bring in all of these knowledge systems that we have in the world, really. Why would we just focus on, what we have in Europe? But let's
Yeah.
see how are, for example, how are, indigenous people in Acre in the Amazon dealing with conflict? How are they dealing with resilience and empowering each other or hardship or whatever? Why don't we learn from people in the Himalaya, for example, how they think and talk about surviving and thriving? And also, why don't we also look at the lived realities of marginalized people living here who have a very specific view on the systems here, on democracy, who have a view also on when democracies fail and when they fail you and us,
Mm.
as citizens.
Yeah.
And let's bring these perspectives in as well. But if we do that, let's not reproduce this extractionary, exploitative um, dynamic, but let's see if we can do this in a reciprocal way, in a just way to a certain degree. Um, and yeah, so this is what I'm now trying to do together with my co-founder Wasima Labish with Imagineers Lab, is to actually operationalize those different knowledge systems, to think about futures also, critical futures thinking, bring in these perspectives, bring in perspectives from critical race theory, social justice, and so forth, epistemic justice in terms of justice of knowledge systems, and see if we can then help organizations who are at the front line of fighting for a better world, so to
Mm.
say, see if we can help them overcome those dysfunctions that we have identified within our work, through our work in these different sectors, and see if we can help to develop and transform their structures, their processes, and accompany them in this new path, so to say. So this is the work that we're doing now.
Yeah, beautifully put as well. I mean, it's multidimensional in the sense too, right? You're talking about decolonizing certain structures, making making sure, or let's say, increasing the opportunity to make them more inclusive,
Mhm.
in a sense, um, and also helping at a grassroots level, helping these organizations reform their own systems in a
Right.
sense, because there is inequality within those systems,
Yeah.
even up to a level, I would believe that the people who, let's say, are part of it, not are not always conscious of it as well.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
and always a thing, right? I mean, it's becoming a kind of a word that is out of fashion. It's being kind of sabotaged by the
Mm.
right, but being woke, that is what it means, right?
Yeah,
Being aware and
yeah,
having your eyes wide open for these dynamics that are playing in the background. They are designed so that you don't necessarily directly see them, especially if you have certain privilege, but they're there nonetheless, and they reproduce all of this division and inequities, and the only way to overcome them is to actually see them and to discuss them and to analyze and then find solutions to overcome them. But yeah, it starts with this awareness, and often the awareness is not there. Not only, let's say, in these institutions that are maintaining the status quo, even in institutions and sectors, organizations that are fighting against the status quo and fighting to make the world a better place. Even there is often this idea where we're trying to do something good. So inherently, everything we do is good, or it's bending towards goodness, so to say.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But then, of course, if you shut your eyes for, and if you're not critical with your own work and not looking at, how are we maybe contributing to the big issue or some other issue, yeah, then of course you're bound to just do those mistakes over and over again.
Yeah.
And I think that especially, those lived realities from the margins, they can help to illuminate that field and to you know shine a light on even the civil society and philanthropy sectors, can shine a light on things that are being reproduced that are actually helping the status quo of empire, that are actually already written into the logic of how the status quo works, and then also showing the necessity to break through this already conceived role that philanthropy plays, for example, and break through this so that we can actually start doing work that challenges the status quo
Mm.
through these institutions, through the resources and so forth that we have, but with a clear goal of actually overcoming them and not playing into the cards that are being dealt.
What a beautiful mission that you are upon. Yeah, thank you so much. I have a feeling, that we could continue for hours
For
and
sure.
hours. If we would, if we would leave the cameras rolling, we could extend this to, let's say, a 3-hour podcast.
Mhm.
If I were to ask you, um, what is our education currently in need of? How would you, let's say, take all of your experiences and the whole journey that you've been upon and that you still are upon? How would you translate all those insights? How would you translate it to, let's say, a need or a call to action, or a combination of various things regarding education? How would you elaborate on that?
I think, I mean, different ways to look at this, of course. One way to look at this is the material level.
Hmm.
I would say that education systems in general need investments um, from governments, and need to be taken seriously also by governments. So if you look at Germany, for example, the education system over here, we actually have 17 different systems, so to say, because of the federal nature of our republic.
Hmm.
Each state controls kind of their, to a certain degree, you know, all of education. We always say Bildung ist Ländersache. So education is states thing.
Yeah.
And then we have these 16 different systems, and then we have one federal system on top of that. And there needs to be harmonization of this. I understand there, especially after the experience of Nazi rule, this very centralized Nazi rule, there was a need to kind of spread power and to go into this federal system. But there are also adverse effects of this. And I think that we can see that with the different levels and different ways of how education is. So, one way would be, that's maybe not the material level, but it's a policy level
Policy level. Yeah.
to kind of harmonize that. Then, like I said, on a material level, invest in education and understand that education, especially in, let's say, um, industrialized society as Germany is, that is predicated on knowledge production, predicated on research and being able to and ingenuity to a certain degree, so that it can be exported because we don't have natural resources or not a lot of natural resources here. You would think that, especially in a society like this, there would be an emphasis on education so that we can actually, get those engineers and get those researchers and so forth that can help develop us technologically. But really, what we're seeing is there is more of an still this idea of, well, we have these different tracks. Some people can go pursue higher education. Some people are, menial labor and so forth. So we need to overcome this as well. Again, another policy suggestion would be to overcome this three-way system. Um, and then in terms of like content, um, there definitely needs to be a decolonization of education. And I don't necessarily mean that in a way of, just learning about colonialism. Of course, this needs to happen as well.
Of
There's
course.
very little education around Germany's colonial past. So that what we've seen is that it's either being denied or it's being, seen as not too bad. And I mean, look at France and look at England and look at all of these other places that were much worse than us, and so on and so forth. When in reality, Germany was at some point the third largest colonial power. They were a colonial power for 35 years, which is almost three times as long as they were a Nazi state. And we can see how 12 years can wreak havoc on societies. You can imagine 35 years of colonial rule can wreak so much havoc, especially Germans doing it, being very thorough with what they do.
Yeah.
So they made sure that even though at shorter time than other colonial empires, they still, did all of the things that empire does. But of course, this needs to be learned. But when I talk about decolonization of education, and it's also kind of the decoupling of this white supremacy, Western imperial thinking that seeps into education. Also, maybe the critical lens that we were talking about, this critical perspective on, economic systems, on capitalism, obviously, on political systems, and so forth. And I think that education, when we talk about content, needs to be closer to the um, lived realities and experiences that people would need later on in life. So, just practically speaking, financial literacy, for example, I didn't learn about anything. That was all, if anything, something that I had to learn myself, or that I had not access to for the longest time. Because also through my family, for example, I got some financial literacy, but not the one that I necessarily would need to thrive here. School didn't prepare me for this. School also didn't prepare me for taxes, for example. I don't understand how this is not like one of the subjects, especially when you're an abitur, when you're about to
Yeah.
embark on life, when you're about to be set free. You need to learn these and need to know these things. So yeah, that's also maybe in different dimension, the practical dimension of the content of what is being taught, that I would also recommend, so to say.
Well, thank you for this extensive analysis and of translating all the things that you do into all these different dimensions and all these different fields and areas, right? In a sense, um, I have for me it feels as a very complete exchange
Yeah.
of just of ideas and this topic of education. What I really loved about this specific conversation is that you still were able to dive into parts of your life, even though we were discussing something that is taking place right now.
Mhm.
The 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 enriching factor and role that Abitur played
Mhm.
in your life. That just it shined through. Let's say all of the things that you are discussing right now. Jeff, thank you so much for this opportunity and for just your willingness to be a part of this and for sharing all of your experiences and knowledge regarding this specific subject. And I would say societal development as a whole,
Right.
right?
All right. Thank you
Thank
so much, Abdehak, for reaching out and having me. I think the work you're doing through this podcast is super critical. And I implore everybody listening to subscribe and continue to support you.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you again for listening and being a part of this endeavor. Follow us on our socials for more content on the podcast. The username is @meneer Hutch, which is Dutch for Mr. Hatch.